Good evening. I'm Bob Shrum, the director of the Center for the Political Future. I'm here with Mike Murphy, our co-director. 70 days to go until the election, and we're going to have a discussion with our three center fellows this semester. Barbara Boxer, former U.S. Senator, 24 years in the U.S. Senate. Mimi Walters, Republican, former U.S. Representative from California's 45th District. She also served in both the California State Senate and the Assembly. Barbara Boxer, of course, served in the House of Representatives before she went to the Senate. And John Chiang was California's 33rd state treasurer. He was also state controller. And he's, I think, one of the more talented public servants that I've met. But that applies to every one of the fellows who's on this call. So I'm going to throw out a question, kind of a general question. And let each of the fellows react to it. And then, Mike, I'd like you to come to something you said last night on MSNBC about that there were aspects of the first night of the Republican convention the Democrats should worry about. But why don't I start with a question, and we'll go to Barbara, and then to Mimi, and then to John. Where do you think the race stands right now? The Democratic convention is over. Most people thought it was a success. We're just into the Republican convention, which will resume, I guess, in about 45 minutes.
Where is the state of play? Well, if you look at the polls, which I do every day, we see it. We see a good lead for Joe, but I'm not complacent at all. I agree with Mike. I did hear what he said. There's nothing like striking a fear into people to get them to wonder whether they really want change. But here's what I think. The Democrats have to be smart about this. And you, Bob, of all people, you are a strategist extraordinaire. This has to be run, this race, against the incumbent. Because when they stand up there and they decry everything, it's their America. It's Trump's America. And the Republicans in Congress who, for the most part, abandon their principles for him. So I think, we'll win if we look at where are we? Are we better off than we were before? Stand up to a lot of the lies. One of the biggest ones is that there was the greatest economy in the history when, in fact, if you look at all presidents, he's about 11th in terms of economic prosperity. Stick with the facts, call out the lies, play on your own field, and we'll be okay. But if we don't do that, if we get sucked in to this fear thing and all, I think we're in trouble. And so I'll close with this. I think the pick of Kamala was a smart pick because Kamala's not an ideologue, neither is Joe. They are pragmatic Democrats. And we're seeing a bit of a realignment with Republicans who are pragmatic, independents who are pragmatic. We need to stick with that and stay away from the ideology. That's my opinion.
Mimi?
I agree with Barbara that this campaign election is a lifetime away. I mean, we're only in August. I mean, it hasn't even gotten to get bad yet. That's going to happen, I think, in September, October, as we get closer to the election. I do agree that with the polls that Joe has been ahead in the polls. The polls are starting to tighten, but if you go back to 2016, if you looked at what the polls said in 2016, you got to throw them all out because nothing happened what the polls said was going to happen. In fact, I was one of those that was absolutely convinced that Hillary Clinton was going to win on election day. I even said it to my daughters that I said, Hillary Clinton's going to be president, and I'm grateful she's a female. I'm just sad that it's not a Republican woman who's going to be president. So I was totally convinced. So I have, I don't pay attention to the polls as much anymore just because it's a total unknown. I think as President Trump and what he has to relay to the voters is, look at my accomplishments, look what I've done. We saw on the election, or I'm on the RNC's convention, the Republican convention last night, the Republicans have tried to highlight some of the positive things that Trump has done. And I think the challenge for the Democrats is they have to look to see what he hasn't done and why the Democrats think that we need to change America and make America better. Trump has to run on his record and show the American people why they are better off than they were 4 years ago. But it comes down to this. It comes down to who is more energized to vote and who's going to turn out the vote. Because at the end of the day, if your voters don't get to the polls or they don't mail in their ballot, then you're going to lose. And so that is the key here. The key is turning out the vote. And we'll see which side is more energized at turning out the vote.
John?
Yeah, we're just beginning. It's going to be fiercely competitive. You're looking at a lot of the states in play, the 7 states that both candidates are going after, with the exception of North Carolina. Joe leads in those. But if you look at some of the surprise victories that President Trump won in the last election cycle, there's still huge opportunity for him. If you look at Wisconsin, if you look at Michigan, if you look at Pennsylvania, the largest number of non-voters are non-college educated white men. And so that's a huge potential block for President Trump. So for the Democrats, if you're looking the younger voters, especially in all the races, the people of color, Latinos, African Americans, Asians, they vote for the Democrats. If you look at Florida, Georgia, Texas, Arizona, the key is, can the Democrats get past the voter suppression efforts, the disinformation efforts, the perhaps foreign influence efforts, and try to energize a young base, especially the younger folks of color, to go out and vote. That's going to be highly operative and key to making sure that we not only have a presidential election, but the opportunities to pick up more congressional seats and perhaps some Senate seats.
Mike, what was the warning note you were sounding last night on MSNBC for Democrats?
Yeah, sure. And I just want to talk for a second first about the election, because I agree with everything I've heard. One thing to remember about polls are they're a noise meter of 10 days ago. And while we know most people in this election are dug in and aren't going to move, there is still some left shifting around. And that's what the whole campaign is about. It's clear the number of people in the key states who want to fire Donald Trump, the president, is bigger than the number of people who want to keep him. So election tomorrow, Biden wins. I'd rather be Biden than Trump. And as a leader of Republican voters against Trump, I'm happy with that. Question is 70 days, what can change? And remember, with vote by mail, election day is really 2 weeks long, as our California polls know here. So, the peak of decision time is really more like 53 or 4 days away. So what can Trump do to change it? And my warning last night, looking at this convention, which was clumsy, unfocused, had a couple of real bad speeches, I was able to turn off my TV and still hear Kimberly Guilfoyle through the window all the way from DC with all that volume. The Earmuff Association just endorsed Trump, but I don't know if any other votes came that way. But here's the thing I think Democrats sometimes miss, because parties have kind of blinders on and they're in their own bubbles, which is the Republicans are good at culture war. And what the Repubs want to do here is they know a referendum on reelecting the president is a hard one to win. People want to fire him. That's been more or less true since he got inaugurated. If you look at all the special elections and midterms, and COVID and the failure there has made it worse. So they got to change the subject. And because Trump is a grievance candidate, they need a grievance crusade. And the Democrats, I believe, and the core of my warning was, they inadvertently step into this a little bit because, and this is a criticism I have from the right, the Democrats sometimes try to define America only as groups, by gender, orientation, race. We're all these competing groups, and most of us have a grievance. And you saw some of that in the Democratic convention. Biden didn't do it in the best speech he's given in his life, which was shrewd. But what happens with the working white, non-college educated, and other white middle-class voters is they see this group and they think, well, wait a minute, we're at the end of the line. We're not the important group here. And a guy like Trump comes around and says, you're being threatened. The world's going to change in bad places. So you got to become a group and fight back against all this stuff culturally that is scary to you. You're sitting in the suburbs, defund the police, all these things you heard last night. So as clumsy as it was, that messaging that the Democrats are going to run amok and Joe Biden is going to go from Obama's second banana to the liberal wing of the Democratic Party's second banana. And again, I'm not talking truth here. I'm talking about perceptions and reality in politics, is an opening for the Republicans to start winning back some of those suburban votes based on fear. And the Democrats have to take that. It's very easy to kind of roll your eyes and say, what a square, clumsy Branson, Missouri convention. But that's the vote that beat Hillary. And Trump's good at playing that piano and changing the subject. So the Dems ought to take that culture war stuff seriously. And Joe Biden had better damn well protect his flank when there are riots on TV every night and not be perceived as a guy who thinks there's no difference between peaceful protest and throwing a brick through a small business window. So the Republicans are cornered and they know how to play this piano. I was part of it for a long time. The Dems ought to be very worried about this, not get cocky on polls that I think will tighten.
I think the polls will tighten. I would say, Mimi, that the national polls, which were measuring the popular vote, were kind of accurate last time. It was the state polls that were inaccurate. So we're going to have to wait and see. We're going to have our own poll will be out again, and then we'll track the race daily from now until the election, starting in a week. Everybody mentioned the Republican convention. So I think we could do another round robin. What was the best speech last night? What was the worst moment?
Well, I'll say Tim Scott, best speech, but notice what he did. He ended it not with Donald Trump's going to save America. He ended it with vote your fine Republican ticket and then got out of the building. He mentioned Trump the least of any of the major speakers and gave the best speech, I think.
What was the worst? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I like Nikki Haley's speech. I thought Nikki did a great job. She was very passionate. She was very, direct about her upbringing and being an immigrant. Her parents were immigrants in this country. And I thought she really connected with the audience that was watching, I believe. I'm not sure about the worst speech. I will say, to Mike's point, Kimberly was awfully loud. And it was almost as if she was shouting into the microphone. I was texting back and forth with some of my friends about it. It was like, wow, okay, take it down a couple notches. But her substance was good, in my opinion, just maybe not so much the delivery.
Well, if I could jump in, I swear I thought she was losing it. I never saw anything like it. I mean, it's not like these people aren't trained, Mimi. We get trained. You're going to teach your students how to be really great candidates. You're going to tell them. When you're speaking, you're speaking to the people who are sitting in their living rooms. She wasn't even in a big crowd. It was
Right.
over the top for a big crowd. I thought that was the worst of the worst and weird. And I tell you, the couple that brandish guns at people, I mean, I do not, if that's the new Republican Party where everybody takes out their guns, that was sort of a shock, and I was so turned off. But look, I'm the worst person to be criticizing Republicans. I will say this. We are fortunate to have Joe Biden. That's why I endorsed him, because Joe Biden is beloved by the middle class, by the working people. That's his whole history. They're going to have a very hard time turning him into something else. And and Joe is always Joe. He's not the type that's going to change. He's going to be who he is. And I think as the campaign goes on, if we were not in a COVID shutdown, he would be, going from state to state, where those swing states that John Chiang spoke about that are so important, he would be with all the lunch bucket, union members. And I think we're going to see that. So, but I agree with everybody's warning. Oh, the last point I would make is so true, what Mimi said about turnout. That is the ball game.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and Mike and Bob, correct me on my numbers. I could be wrong, but I've been doing some research on turnout. And essentially, the people over 39 vote in pretty good numbers, like about 70%. And the people below that vote about 45%. Now, if the young people, and whether they're Republican or Democrat, most are probably Democrats and independents, if they turn out, it's a whole other situation, because when pollsters ask, they always ask, did you vote the last time? And that's the likely voter that comes out in the polls. So all of that is unknown, and that's what makes it interesting.
Yeah, there's a new echelon poll that shows that among college students, Biden has a 52% lead. Not 52% of the vote, a 52% lead. The question is whether or not they're going to vote.
Exactly.
John, how did you react to that first night of the Republican convention?
So I thought Tim Scott was the best by far by demeanor and message. So we know the Trump administration is, or the candidacy is going to go after security issues, right? Economic security for middle-class Americans. And then they're going to talk about on the world stage that Joe Biden is incompetent, right? Perhaps using the Gates quote that he's never, in 40 years, never gotten foreign policy or international policy correct. It's really important for the Biden-Harris campaign to make sure they maintain the narrative and to put President Trump on the defensive. Right, this so far after the first night we saw a whitewash of the coronavirus issue. Right, they didn't discuss it. They need to talk about the fact that on the basic core needs today, you're not addressing the healthcare needs. You're not addressing the economic security needs. Right, they brought in Tim. They brought in Vernon to speak. But you can talk about the African Americans having the best economic performance, right? And I don't know if those numbers are correct, but what's happening to Latino, Black, Asian communities today? You can make these pronouncements about eviction, but you have no federal government action on it. What's happening to PPP access for Black businesses? It's not happening. So at every time that the Trump campaign tries to go in the affirmative, the Biden campaign just has to hit them with present day reality and remind them they're failing today.
Yeah, I think that comment about incompetence is interesting, because I think the Trump campaign has made what could turn out to be a kind of elementary political mistake, where they basically have been lowering expectations for Joe Biden, Biden in the basement, sleepy Joe. Well, that wasn't what we saw at the Democratic convention, which I want to talk about in a minute. But the real danger here is that if Biden goes into those debates and performs well, that argument evaporates. And then what's left, I think, is what Mike was talking about, fear. And they're trying to say Biden's for defunding the police. He's not. He actually wants to put more resources into the police and reform them. They're saying that he supports the rioters, which he's absolutely condemned them. And by the way, the debate stage will be a great place for him to do that again. But that, I think, is the big opening that Republicans have. And if you have a lot of rioting in the next few months, it's going to scare the hell out of a lot of people. And that may give Trump an opening, even though right now, in most of the data, people by a pretty substantial margin say that Biden would be better at handling race relations. So we talked about the Republican convention. Let's talk about the Democrats. First of all, what did you all think of it? Are we going to have virtual conventions in the future? Is that going to profoundly change the way we put these national conventions together? Anyone can start.
Well, quickly, I'll just chime in. I thought they did a good job in a new world of these virtual conventions, which some form of that is here to stay, because the 1899 model of a big crowd in the hall is kind of passé to begin with. I thought what counted was Biden's speech, which was excellent. What was bumpy was, again, I think some of the identity and social justice stuff that was such a heavy chord. It opens up a culture war opportunity for Republicans. But I was so happy with Biden's speech on many levels, including crushing, at least for now, the Sleepy Joe thing. I give him a good grade. I thought there was one shortcoming It was that the number Biden has to move is management of the economy. We just did a poll for Republican voters against Trump of voters in Florida who are independents or Republicans, no Democrats, who are not committed to Biden or Trump. So we're talking about 3-4% of the electorate at most. Tricky poll to do. And we asked them what the most important 7 issues were when they pick a president. We asked them who's better on each one after they picked. Trump beats Biden on managing the economy there. And as I wrote in the Washington Post piece this weekend, if there is a mania of enthusiasm about leaked results of a vaccine trial that may be too good to be true, but people are so hungry for good news, and the debate becomes, okay, this thing is going to be gone with the new vaccine. Who can run the economy? Today, Trump has an advantage, and that is a number Biden has to move, and I think they could have done more at the convention. But overall, I'll give him an A.
Barbara?
Okay. I agree with Mike on this point about the economy, because the facts are on our side. I was there when we balanced the budget, for God's sake. We did it. And that was with Bill Clinton. And I was there when we had the most jobs created in recent memory, was under the Clinton presidency, and later Obama and Biden picked us up off the floor. So I think we have to tell the story. And if you go back, if you left the stock market, we all know, those of us who've looked at this, that stock markets historically do better under Democrats. So we did, but we have that bad rap, that we have the big deficits, which we don't. And so we really need, I agree, to focus on this. And again, I think Joe is a good candidate to do that because, he is a lunch bucket Democrat, and he himself, his story of his dad coming upstairs and saying, honey, it gives me the chills every time he tells it. I knew his dad, actually. Walked up to say, honey, we have to move. Daddy lost his job, but we're going to be okay. And Mike, I'm so grateful you guys are out there. I can't tell you. I get a bit emotional about it because I do think this is about democracy itself. I won't get all into it, and I did say to my husband a long time ago, it's going to take some brave Republicans to bring about a realignment here. There's so many Republicans that whisper at night about how they're upset they are, but they don't do anything about it. But getting back to conventions, I love conventions. I haven't missed one since 1983. That's why I got elected in 82. In 84, I guess, was my first one. Was in San Francisco. I've spoken at every single one, either teeny like 30 seconds or 5 minutes. But I want to say this, as the years went by, and I don't know if my colleagues had the same experience, people would say, these conventions are ridiculous. They cost so much. You got to get money from the special interests to pay for them, and they're unwieldy, and so much partying and this and that, and what's the point? I always stuck up for the conventions, but I think as we're seeing in university level with these hybrid models that may be coming to the fore, we may see a hybrid level. I thought the calling of the roll was really one of the highlights in the Democratic convention. It was so wonderful to see, without anybody making big speeches, just take a look at the Democrats. I'm very proud to see, the unity of the ticket itself. It's a smart ticket, but just looking at the ticket, older, younger, male, female, different backgrounds, and seeing that all over the country in front of these iconic places was very, very special. So I think we'll probably have a hybrid going forward.
I tend to agree with that because for me, one of the most moving moments of the Democratic convention, and it sparked more social media interactions than anyone else, including the Obamas, was the young man in New Hampshire who stuttered.
Absolutely.
And who spoke before Biden, reading that speech. It took a lot of bravery for him to do what he did, but it was emblematic of what the videos that they produced achieved. They told a story about Biden, whether it was a train conductor who, after he got to know on Amtrak, and years later, after he has a heart attack, Biden calls him in a barber shop in New York to say, how are you? There were a lot of stories like that, and I think they mattered. So I'll let John praise the Democrats, then I'll see if Mimi wants to tell us what Democrats did wrong.
Give them hell, Mimi.
Okay.
Well, I think the convention served its purpose. Right, it's a party a campaign that's more inclusive, that offers a clear contrast. I think what the shortcomings are is, building that energy. No, people didn't make a mistake. But it's how you do it virtually is incredibly difficult. Now, as to the convention itself, and the numbers that resulted afterwards, what I only saw one, that people enjoy the virtual convention. But as Barbara pointed out, and I agree with her fully, I think it's going to be a hybrid model. And you have to have that energy and passion when we can return to a new normal where people can congregate. You want that energy and creating that buzz that happens from live interaction. And so I don't want to, hopefully we get to better times and we don't have to live through more virtual conventions.
The networks used to refuse to broadcast those videos, but because of the nature of this convention, they went ahead and did it. If we go back to a hybrid, it will be interesting to see whether or not they turn to their talking heads during those videos or whether they let them play out. I think that will be very interesting. Now, the thing that I think will push them toward playing them is they're good television. The Democratic convention was good television. We don't yet know for sure how the Republican convention will be received. We know it had the 15% less viewership than the opening night of the Democratic convention. Okay, Mimi, tell me what was wrong with the Democrats.
Well, first of all, I'm going to say something very nice. I thought that Kamala Harris did an excellent job on her speech. I've always seen Kamala as a very strong-willed, very tough person, and sort of edgy. And I thought that her speech she gave, seemed very kind, very human, very down to earth. And I thought she gave an excellent speech and let really the nation know who she is. I didn't feel that the Democrat convention had a message of how they really want to make America better. I didn't see much of a plan that they have to motivate their voters. I think they're struggling right now with, you have the far left wing of the party and you've got sort of the moderate wing of the party, and they're trying to figure out how do they balance that far left, because the far left are going to be the voters that come out and vote because they are so passionate. We have that on our side, on the Republican side. Our far right people go out and they vote. Those are the passionate people. So I think the Democrats are sort of struggling with, what is our message? We don't want to go to socialism, which, by the way, the Republicans are going to play on that. The Republicans are pushing the socialism aspect of it. And I think the Democrats are opening the door for them to play that card. And that's taking it too far. So I think that the messaging the Democrats need to work on a little bit better. But by and large, I thought Joe Biden gave an excellent speech as well. His challenge is going to be in those debates, to see if he can be as polished in the debates as he was giving that speech. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the debates. But as far as the conventions go, I hope it is some sort of a hybrid. I would hate to see conventions this way. I think you lose the power of people and ideas being exchanged when you're together. I think it's important for people to be together. I think it energizes the party when you have conventions. It energizes the grassroots, and I think they're very, very important to continue the way that they were. But I would imagine that there will be some sort of hybrid. I can't imagine that we will have another convention like we're having right now, unless there's another epidemic and we have to, or another pandemic and we have to.
John?
So I spoke to this. Do you have the?
Yeah, okay, I'll move it on, because I thought one of the things that was extraordinary about this convention, as distinct from 2016, was that Bernie Sanders was all in for Joe Biden. Elizabeth Warren was all in for Joe Biden. And I think that, by the way, doesn't reflect Biden's ideological surrender. For example, he rejected the idea of Medicare for all, even in the working groups that they put together before the convention. I think it reflects a personal relationship that is typical of Biden, who talked to Sanders throughout the 2016 campaign when he was running against Hillary. When Sanders would say, "I want to come see you," Biden would say yes, and who built a good relationship with him all through the primaries and through the primary debates. So I think Sanders deserves some credit from a Democratic perspective about the affirmative way in which he has conducted himself. And at this point, unlike 2016, most of the data show that somewhere north of 90% of Sanders voters say they're going to vote for Biden.
But I think there was lessons learned from 2016. So
yeah, and
yeah,
I also
you can thank Donald Trump. You know, he is a wonderful polarizing force to unite the Democrats. That's why I'm one click less concerned about turnout. In presidential elections, turnout is naturally quite high. It's off-year elections where turnout can really kill you, but it's still wise for the Democrats to focus on their younger voters who have had, at least before, during the primaries, less enthusiasm for Biden. But I think Trump might have cured that. I'll give the convention organizers a plug too. It was just one of many segments, but I thought the locker room thing with all the defeated candidates talking was very good. Because normally they all want to poison each other. You know, it's the nature. You guys know who've been on the ballot before what primaries are like. It takes a while. But Trump is such a focusing entity, and I think Biden's personality, which is why he was effective in the Senate. You know, I know Mitch McConnell's the Dracula of the Democratic Party, but he was often the one guy on the D side who can go in a room with Mitch and get a deal done, and that's a huge skill. So I thought a little of that Biden charisma showed that they were very comfortable talking about why they kind of liked him. And anyway, I thought that was good television, and I've never seen it before.
And just
So,
Mike,
go ahead.
on this thing about Joe, who is a very special human being, and I know him since the 80s. I backed him when he ran then. Imagine all those years ago. When Lindsey Graham says you can't find a nicer person in politics than Joe Biden, this is why it was a very smart move to nominate Joe, because he is really kind of a beloved figure. Now, listen to this. They're going to try to destroy him limb from limb. This is going to be the ugliest thing. Lord knows what's going to happen. October surprise, August, September. They'll try to pull everything. But I think because Joe is such a known quantity, it's not like somebody who just is a wonder kid. You know, he's been around, he's lost, he's won, he's had the most tragic things happen to him. He's pulled himself up. People do love him. And you're absolutely right, Mike. He could get a deal with the Republicans. He could pass things that other people couldn't. He was a master at it. And by the by, that has to come out too, in addition to his economic plans, also the fact that he gets things done. I think people want to hear that.
Yeah, if
Okay.
I were the amazing Kreskin and I could prove it, I would bet money that 1/3 of the Republican Senate conference in the privacy of the secret ballot will vote for Joe.
Wow.
Okay, last quick question, and then we're going to turn this over to the people who are watching and let them ask. Is there going to be an October surprise?
Yes.
And what's it going
There
to be?
usually is. There usually is.
I'll
So
tell you in October.
We should pull one on them, for God's sake.
Well, I myself would not be surprised if the administration announced a vaccine, short-circuiting some of the trials. And I might not be surprised if, for example, Attorney General Barr indicted Hunter Biden. Now, I don't think that would work, by the way, because I think people would see it as deeply, deeply political. After the experience they had in 2016, I don't think they'd be very receptive to that. Anyone else have an October
I'll
surprise?
speculate the Southern District of New York is winding up to, I think, put a tax avoidance case on
Right.
Trump.
I was just
That
going to
looks
say
like it's
that.
coming.
What if we saw his tax returns? That would be a surprise, probably, or maybe not. But
I don't know that we can see the tax returns before the election, but I think Mike's right. The Southern District of New York could be moving on this, and it could become a very big story.
Michael Cohn's book, that's one.
That's a September surprise, September 8th.
That's right.
All right, let's open this up to questions, and we're going to try something. It's a little dangerous on Zoom. We're going to let you ask your own questions. So try not to talk over each other. And if it doesn't work, then Erica will come back in and ask the questions that you send in. So who's got a question?
What do you think was the most effective speech at the DNC for voter persuasion and turnout? I think it was either President Obama's or Michelle Obama's.
Other than Joe helping Joe and Obama helping institutions, because she's a huge pop culture figure, I'd say Michelle.
Yeah, by social media following and responses, it was Michelle Obama. And that, for me, her comments were the most compelling by far.
I give a vote to Michelle, also making sure we know that Joe did give the best speech I've ever heard him give, ever.
Next question.
Bob, I'll try one and say hello to Mike and Barbara as well as you. It's great to see you. I'm sure you've heard Paul Begala. He's been on the air a lot and he's written a new book about in 2016, the trap was the party focused so much on Trump, the evil character, that the party forgot to tell voters what it was going to do for them. Don't you think that the convention fell into that trap? And do you think we can get out of that so that people understand what Build Back Better means for them? How do you see that, Barbara, in particular?
Well, you have to focus on the reality of what people are going through. And I think the convention did that. You know, Trump doesn't mention anything about the 170,000 plus people that have died. A lot of people in this country are hurting, or they're scared they're going to get this thing. They're out of work. So I think the convention did hit the mark on that. Yeah, it was sad. But I think we have to focus on what is wrong with Trump's America. It includes this terrible response to COVID, this lack of empathy on COVID, and a racial justice situation that breaks your heart. This latest one,
yeah, unbelievable.
And the fact is, this is going on in Trump's America. So yes, you need the plan. I agree with Mike. You've got to show how you're going to make it better. I thought when Joe said, yes, I'd shut it down if I have to, he should have said, and he probably did, but it didn't get covered. Of course, we have to make people whole while we shut it down. You can't just say, shut it down. We're going to shut it down and take care of the people, which is what Nancy Pelosi, I think, is so good at. But we've got a post office under attack, Social Security under attack. These are iconic institutions. Again, I will say this till I'm blue in the face, but blue is a good color because I'm a Democrat. Bottom line is, it is Trump's America. We've got all these horrible problems, in addition to having a president who cares more about himself than anybody else. And we cannot get off that track, because once we get into ideology and all the other stuff, we're lost. We got to stick with our pragmatic politics, how to make life better for people, with a guy who knows how to do it and has done it in the past.
And I'll just quickly chime in. That's what I meant when I said the convention slipped on economics. They got to hurt Trump, but they got to win the battle of here's what's on the menu for you, when this thing is over. And they got a campaign to do it with. The other thing they need are surrogates that are credible outside politics. I want to see the Buffetts of the world be part of the Biden recovery plan to move that number. And I think the Biden guys have been we talked about that on Hacks on Tap this morning with Jen Heilman. They've been weirdly quiet about their kind of economic comeback team plan personnel. And there's a wealth of Democrats with credibility from the Clinton years and the Obama years they could surround Joe with. Because, Joe is a deal-making senator, which I can argue is what we need. He's not the king of economic policy. But why not buttress him with all that? So that's a move they can and should make, soon.
Yeah, I agree.
Go ahead, John.
Mike and Russell, to your point, it's a tremendous opportunity for the Biden campaign to respond. You're talking about the digital divide. You see the divisions in class and communities. We ought to be building and remedying that digital divide today. And so that's that plan is talking about. When we talk about military international security, the numbers are terrible. We were depending on international countries for 70 something percent of PPE. Now we're 90% dependent, right? We're supposed to reduce those numbers. What happens to the national energy grid, right? What happens to our healthcare and our bioterrorism infrastructure systems, right? So this is a matter of both national and international security for the US.
Yeah. I have 4 quick points. One, the country knows who Joe Biden is. They didn't necessarily know a lot about Joe Biden, even though he'd been vice president. So the biographical part of the Democratic Convention was important. Number 2, in terms of economics and plans, I think giving a State of the Union-like message saying, I'm going to do this, 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 A, wouldn't work in the virtual universe, and B, would turn people off. I agree with Mike, by the way, that signaling about this with someone like Warren Buffett is actually as powerful as going into the details, more powerful than going into the details of the plans. Third, this is where the debates will be important, because economic policy will be debated. Finally, and someone said this very early on, Democrats have a very high interest in keeping this as a referendum on Donald Trump. As Mike said, the country would like to fire him. And we have to be a little careful not to overcorrect 2016 and get into a choice argument when in fact our fundamental argument, or the fundamental Democratic argument, should be a referendum argument. We have another question?
Sure. Bob, I've heard you say that you were disappointed in the 2016 Democratic representation because it paid so little attention to economics. And here we have Mike criticizing the convention on exactly the same point. Can I ask you what you think the economic message ought to be to the swing states, that it would actually make a difference where we need to make a difference?
Well, first of all, I think that the coming weeks, you need to roll out that message. I think it needs to focus on healthcare. It needs to focus on the economy connected to COVID. Biden actually had a section in his acceptance speech where he talked about massive investment in infrastructure. Mm-hmm. I think that's a very important piece of this. But at the end of the day, the problem in 2016, in my view, was that the Access Hollywood tape became a bright, shining object. And the Clinton campaign suddenly decided to talk only about that. I thought what they were going to do was go after Trump personally, then say, by the way, this is how he treated his employees. This is how he treated the people who did business with him. And then say, and his economic plan actually doesn't help the middle class. It helps the people at the top. Here's what I want to do. They forgot all of that and just stayed all the way to the end of the campaign on Trump's a bum. And the other advantage, by the way, that Biden has is he does not have nearly the burden of the unfavorables yet that Hillary Clinton did. And I think Barbara's right. It's going to be hard to give him the burden of unfavorables at that level. Other people may have a different take on this, so I turn it over to them.
No, it's
Anyone
middle
else?
class economics. It's going to be higher wages, real wages, affordable health care, and
Right.
back to stability. And, I don't think they're going to deliver any of that, by the way, but since it's not Trump, I'm for it. But that's the pitch. People are in a real wage squeeze now. They've started to go up, but it's been a decade. And the fear from COVID, when most Americans barely have enough savings to last, 60 days at most. So it's taking that economic insecurity away and turning Trump chaos into economic danger to your kitchen table. I think that's the formula for him.
I would add.
Go ahead.
I would add one thing. I think we need to look at the swing states, and I think that both Republicans and Democrats need to be very careful when you're looking at the policies that affect the swing states. For example, Pennsylvania being one of the swing states. How far do you go on energy in Pennsylvania? They rely a lot on coal. They rely a lot on the fossil fuels, and maybe not as much as on renewables. So I think when you get that economic message out there on the Democrat side, they have to be very mindful, as Republicans do, on what are the policies that are going to affect those people in those swing states when it comes to their own jobs and their own livelihoods.
Totally agree.
To jump in, one of the great things I loved about Joe's handling of climate change is he said climate change is about three things: jobs, jobs, and jobs. And I think that is, as someone who's fought for policies for so long, if we look at California, what we see, and it's just a fact, that we've had so many jobs created as we move to clean energy. And the truth is, Mimi is right. You got to be careful. You got to do it right. You got to move it slowly. You got to move it wisely. And you don't scare people into it. But I like that Joe, I think Joe gets what Mike has been saying. I think it's time for them to really move out with the kind of people behind them, the economic think tank that Mike suggests. I think it's very smart. But I think he gets it because he is of that. He comes from that wing of the Democratic Party, the working person wing, you know, the union member wing. That's what he's from.
We have time probably for a couple more questions. And then I guess we ought to go look at the Republican convention, which has just convened.
Professor
Any
Shrum,
other
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm curious, last time we talked about the amount that swing states had, the massive impact on the results of the election. How do you think the instruments in place for getting out the vote in swing states change this year based on what we learned from last time, but also based on the pandemic?
Well, Gavin, they're going to be virtual. We're not going to have people walking up and down the street knocking on doors. The Trump campaign says it is. I think that's a bad idea. I don't think it would help them. And in fact, I think a lot of times people wouldn't answer the door. And I think there will be a very sophisticated, on both sides, by the way, a very sophisticated targeting effort that will be made. And they'll understand what issues people care about. They'll try to communicate on those issues. Mary Louise Oates, my better half, is writing postcards to people in Florida and Arizona. I think that's going on all over the country. And I assume the Trump people will do the same thing. But I also agree with Mike. Turnout in presidential elections tends to be pretty high. The big problem for Democrats last time was that in those three blue wall states that fell red, you had a huge drop-off in African-American vote from 2012 to 2016. I think that will change in part because of Kamala Harris and in part because Joe Biden, as Barbara Boxer suggested, relates to those folks in a way that perhaps Hillary Clinton did not. Her husband did, but I don't think that she necessarily did. Anyone else want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, can
Well,
I?
I go ahead, Mimi.
So
No, John, go ahead.
So the two fastest growing ethnicities in the United States are Latino and Asian. And so if you look at the 2016 to 2018 races where you had 13 to 17% turnout for the Latinos and Asians, during that last cycle, it bumped up into over the 30s, right? So they hold their numbers, right? We will have increased African-American turnout, right? But you have the other emerging people of color that should have higher turnout too.
I'll just add the dimension that, vote by mail is tricky in some of these states that aren't as used to it. In California, you have some malicious interest in the Trump world about the post office, which has been systemically failing for years, but is coming to during this crisis ahead. And then finally, there's a panic inside the Republican National Committee because the technical staff knows, as Governor Pete Wilson can explain, that the large absentee ballots participation has actually been very good for the Republican Party over the years. So there's a real worry that the president is convincing his supporters they can't trust absentee ballots, which could be a turnout detriment to Republican suburbanites and others who don't like to stand in polling place lines. So it's very complicated math, and you wonder how intent to turn out turns into actual vote counting. And then you've got the problem of election day being 2 weeks long. Well, counting the ballots could be a week long. How do we do that with the circus of the media and Trump declaring the whole thing invalid and all that? So there's a whole suite of problems about having election, counting in a COVID era.
I'll just say one thing. This is not what I was going to say, but Mike just brought something to my attention. I think the confusion on the issue with the voting by mail, what Trump and the Republicans are very concerned about, and rightfully so, is that there are some states that are going all by mail, meaning they are sending anybody who's a registered voter is going to receive a ballot in some states. State of California is one of them. And what that means is there will be a lot of ballots that are going to be sent to people who have moved or who have passed away. And just to give you an example, in LA County in 2019, Judicial Watch won a lawsuit against LA County because there was 1.5 million registered voters who were inactive. And that meant those voters had either left the state or they had passed away. And so what that lawsuit forced all the counties to clean up their voter rolls. Now, you can only imagine if that had not been done. And this is a valid concern that the Republicans have when you go to sending anybody who's a registered voter in your state a ballot. There is ripe for fraud. Now, voting by absentee is something completely different. And the president is not concerned about voting by absentee, because absentee means you go out, you request a ballot, an absentee ballot, a ballot is then sent to you, you can fill it out and send it in. Completely different.
That is wrong.
So-
There is no evidence that there's widespread fraud around it.
That is just wrong. And I mean,
no,
Yeah,
Barbara,
Mimi Walters is lying right now.
no.
Oh, wait, let's not use that
We're going to
term.
mute you, Christian, if you
Yeah,
do that
let's not
stuff.
use
the
that
point
term.
is, if you
Use
have,
what term?
and what I said is it's ripe for fraud. Again, 1.5 million people are inactive voters in LA County, and they were forced to clean up the voter rolls. If that did not happen, and ballots were sent to that 1.5 million people, you don't think there's an opportunity for voter fraud?
Look, I respectfully disagree with you, and I'm very grateful that you're coming to be a fellow. But
I
the
can't
state of
wait, Bob, to have
Washington,
more discussions.
the state of Washington, the state of Oregon, these states have been voting by mail universally for years.
It took them
California
5
has
years in the
heavily
state of
voted
Washington.
universally.
5 years in the state of Washington to clean it up. 5 years. It didn't happen overnight.
I think this is an argument of convenience that Trump is making because he wants to delegitimize the election. And I think Mike is absolutely right. In Florida, for example, now Trump has said, oh, vote by mail is fine in Florida because they've had 2 Republican governors. That's almost an exact quote. The fact is that vote by mail, if you have checks, you have signature checks, for example, is perfectly appropriate. If you send a ballot out and someone's dead,
Florida doesn't
someone else
send
gets
all the
hold.
ballots
Mimi,
out.
I'm going to finish. Someone else gets hold of it, and they vote and they sign it. How are they going to duplicate the signature? It's impossible.
Could I just say this? First of all, this is made up baloney because we've already had, as Bob said, several states that do it. And we have a lot of Republican governors, I hate to tell you, across the country, such as the one from Ohio and other places, who are saying it is safe. Now, if you are that distrustful of constituents, that's a sad situation because it's the same affidavit that you sign when you sign your absentee ballot. And I want to say one more thing where I think Trump is so wrong on this. I ran 4 times statewide in this crazy large state. I always lost the absentee vote by mail. And Bob, you know this as a Democratic consultant, Mike knows it as a Republican. I was losing big time because the Republicans are just much better at voting. And so this whole thing is goofy on its head. And to me, it's such an insult to the American people for people to say, oh, you're going to cheat. If you're living in a house and the dead person gets the ballot, you don't fill that ballot out, you throw it out. Nobody's going to do that. And there is no proof that this is an invitation to fraud. This is just a way to suppress the vote in a time of COVID. And it is sad to think that that's what we would think of the American people, that they would sign on to somebody else's ballot. It's just awful.
Yeah.
Well,
I just have to say that over my shoulder, Mayor Daley is chuckling a little bit because there has been in American history. And I like the regular absentee ballot system a lot more than Nevada in a few states that are brand new to flooding a lot of ballots out, because there is not, we don't have the evidence of fraud, but there is some potential for it.
See, Mike really is
Not an absentee.
running Republican voters against Trump. That was a good Republican point that he made there. I think we should probably wind this up unless somebody feels compelled to say something else. It's been an interesting discussion. It got to be a very lively discussion. I'm very grateful to the fellows for the contribution they make to the center, and I'm very grateful to you for this discussion tonight, and so is Mike.
Absolutely. Thank you all for
Fight on.
participating. Tune into that Republican convention. It might cure what ails you. And I got to watch it because I'm on TV later to react. So thank you all. See you around the center.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.